Yesterday we talked about two elements in Providence. The ultimate motivating element, which is loving kindness on the one hand, and the practical hands-on element, which is justice. We spoke about how they're related to one another, how they one generates the other, and the two consequences that when justice is being applied, first consequence, when justice is being applied, it is applied as a father would treat his son with kindness and with a commitment to benefiting him. It's not just mechanical justice. You know, in classical statuary, justice is depicted as a woman who's blindfolded. And that's precisely what we are rejecting. That means you apply justice irrespective of who you're applying it to and what the consequences will be. You know, if he stole X amount of money, take X amount of money away from him and give it to the person he stole. He'll starve to death. What's that got to do with his stealing? He stole. End of story. Death, too bad. That's justice, blind justice. No consideration whatsoever for whom, or for example, like there's the Gemara's case, you know, say eye for an eye, right? So we understand that an eye for eye is really money. But the Gemara asks the following question: suppose a person with one eye puts out one eye of a person with two eyes. So now, if you say an eye for an eye, you can take the criminal and put out his one eye. He's going to become blind. But he didn't make the victim blind. They didn't do that to him. So why would an eye for an eye be just? Certainly couldn't be just in all cases. But that would be the idea of justice. If you held that eye for an eye was a principle, you wouldn't look. One eye, two eyes, becoming blind, so what? One eye out, one eye out. Right? So that picture of justice as blind in that way, as indifference to whom it's applied, is something which we would reject altogether. Justice is an instrument in loving kindness. And loving kindness seeks the best outcome for all concerned. It doesn't stand on its own. And therefore it's going to be modified by the fact that it's under the control, at the direction of loving kindness. Now, in this book, I'm quoting others for him, like the Das Tunis. This book he doesn't mention, and in this book, chapters 1 and 2, loving kindness as the source of all creation is there. We spoke about it weeks ago. Is there word for word. But in this chapter 8 of part 2, he calls it Hanhagas Romamuso, his transcendence, his overwhelming gap between what he is and the universe that he created. Yichud, his uniqueness and his sole control of all that's going on. Now, here the words refer to another characteristic of providence. It's another, meaning it's another concept. It's not another feature. It's not another reality. It's just another concept that applies to this particular reality. Here you have a very interesting event when the Jews were at the Red Sea and the Egyptian army was bearing down on them. And to one side, the other side, there were mountains, and behind them is the sea, and the army is coming down at them. And it says that Moses was praying. And God says to him, Ma titzak Eli. Now, one way to translate those words is, why are you crying out to me? Why not? Isn't that what you're supposed to do in trouble? There is a disagreement about whether prayer is biblically ordained or rabbinically ordained, the Isser, the Rabbanan, but everybody agrees that when you're in trouble and you're praying for salvation, that's biblically ordained. That is the full strength mitzvah of prayer. So why shouldn't he pray? Now, one way to explain it is based on Kabbalistic sources, where they put in a comma. Ma titzak, comma. Why are you crying out? Elai. Hadover totally. It all depends upon me. All depends upon me. So you shouldn't be crying out. And the reader says, I wonder what that means. Depends upon you. I shouldn't be crying out. And the answer in Kabbalistic terms is this. There are some things in the world that are reactions to what people do. Meaning that if a person does one thing will happen. And if a person does another thing will happen, because the divine reaction will be different for the two different actions. Some things are like that. For example, reward and punishment is like that. If you do a mitzvah, you'll get a reward. If you do a transgression, you'll get a punishment. What you get depends upon what you do, because God set it up that way. But not everything is like that. Not everything is like that. There's some things where there's a plan for how the universe has to progress, and even if your actions for you individually, or the actions of all mankind collectively, don't justify that particular type of control or direction, it'll happen anyway because it's necessary for the world to progress. This is what was implied when I spoke yesterday about the two different consequences of its being under the control of loving kindness. One was when there is justice, punishment, suffering applied, it's applied like a father to a son. But the second one was, if the world's deterioration is so bad that according to justice the world doesn't deserve to exist at all, then God will simply overlook that consequence. Just overlook it and keep the world going anyway. And then he quoted the verse, I will show grace to whom, I'll be gracious to whom I shall be gracious. I shall show mercy to whom I shall show mercy. Meaning, I'm doing it, period. Period. You have nothing to do with it. You're not contributing anything to it. It's not because of you at all. I want this to happen because I need it to happen for my plans. That's when he says to Moses, don't pray. Because if you pray and then what you pray for happens, it looks very much like it's happening was a response to your prayer. And that makes it look like it was dependent upon your prayer. And that's not true in this case. So don't pray. Because by praying, you falsify the real nature of the event. You give it an appearance that's not correct. So here, that's why I think he calls, in this case, this higher principle. He doesn't mention here that it's loving kindness. He mentions the fact that it is a principle that's divorced from responding to our actions. It's an expression of his plans for the universe without any consideration of the way our actions work. When you do good to someone, that could be affected by his actions. He may not be able to handle the act of the good that you're giving him, or it should be delayed, or some other things. Here he wants this aspect of it's the same thing, but this aspect of its being above, or what philosophers would call transcendent. And I'll give you another example of this, because the Gemara in Pesachim says there are 7 things created before the creation of the world. Now, time for a small footnote. Before the creation of the world is an oxymoron. Obviously, since time is a feature of the created world, there is no before the creation of the world. And the Talmud knew that. The Talmud is saying that these 7 things, are such that without them, the world won't succeed. It won't survive. So they are the axioms upon which the existence of the world depends. In that sense, they are prior to everything else in the world. And one of them is tshuva. Now, tshuva, when a person commits a transgression, so the Torah gives you a way to fix it. And you go through a certain procedure, and then there are consequences. Now, there's a variety of descriptions of the consequences, but one, which we have mentioned here previously, is that the event in history becomes detached from your record. As the Rambam puts it, one of the things that about tshuva may do, it doesn't have to do it, but may do is to change its name, as if to say, I didn't perform that action. So the action is there in history. You're not blotting out the action, but it's not part of my record. It's like anonymous. It happened, but it's not attached to anybody's moral and spiritual record. Now, logic would tell you that's an impossibility. Logic would tell you that you can't change the past. Because logic told you that we'd be playing games with you because you can't change the future either. Can't change the future. The future just will be what it will be. The contrast between the past and the future, if there is one, is that you can't cause the past, but you can cause the future. Okay, but the bottom line here is that if the past has in it, in fact, that he did this action, that's the past fact. So now, you can't undo a past fact. The fact is what it is. There's only one record of events, which is the past. Couldn't be on Tuesday 100 years ago was this, and on Wednesday 100 years ago was that. There's only one thing 100 years ago could be. It doesn't have alternatives. It can't be sometimes one and sometimes the other. History doesn't work that way. So here again, we're being told that although logic doesn't support this idea, in some sense, that's exactly what happens. What happens when you do tshuva, it no longer is part of your past record. Now you can easily say it's not counted as if it's your record. You're not held responsible for it anymore. No consequences will accrue to you because of that. I think it means more than that, but that's an easy way to understand it. But here again is the idea that something which, if we were setting up the world, we would never dream of this, because we know the past is what it is, and we calculate the past into all of the future events that take place. And because Baruch Hu says, not in my world, Not in my world. Why? Because I'm running it. I'm running it. And in fact, the verses in Isaiah, on which this is based, are very evocative. The verses there say, just as the rain comes down from heaven and moisturizes the earth so that plants can grow, so my word, when it comes out of my mouth, causes the world to exist and to develop, and it works. It's guaranteed to work. Nothing can stop it. Just like the moisture causes the plants to grow, so my word causes the world. And that's why tshuva is accepted, because it's necessary for the world. So here you have a picture of a Kadosh Baruch Hu acting out of a position of transcendence where what he does isn't determined or dependent upon what people do. We saw yesterday, the day before, Ramchal says here, the very fact of reward and punishment means, in a certain sense, Kadosh Baruch Hu made what he does dependent upon what people do. Reward and punishment carries that by definition. He decided he wanted to do that, but he didn't give up his transcendence. He didn't give it up. He, for the purposes of reward and punishment, generally made his governance of the world responsive, but not totally and not absolutely. And for whatever reason he has, he can transcend that and simply say, not in this case. Not doing that anymore. Yeah, you have a question?
Just for clarification, when you say God made tshuva, like repentance, is that an attribute of God, or is it how it in the interaction between us and God? Meaning, is it attributed to us, or is it, and do you understand what I'm saying?
I think so, and I think that the answer is that it's both. The process of tshuva is something that we undertake. We have to do it. But then the question is, what does it cause? What are its consequences?
So God didn't have this attribute of tshuva before?
Now let's get something. We're playing with words here, right? God doesn't have the attribute of wood ever. Not before, not after, not in between, not on Thursdays. God is not wood at all, ever. He creates wood. But to say that he creates something doesn't mean that it's his attribute.
So when you say, so that was the other part of the question. Is it something that is just tangible to us in a sense where it applies to us, or is that concept
it's a creation.
That concept exists?
Tshuva is a creation like Tables and chairs are creations. Like souls are creations. It's a creation.
So it didn't necessarily work, it was just Minas Adin before?
Not before. There's no before and after. It's a package deal. Who talked about before? I didn't say anything about before. Indeed, I said the opposite. I said that tshuva is one of the 7 things that's created upon which the whole world rests. So there's no time at which there wasn't tshuva. There's no time at which there wasn't tshuva. We weren't talking about time.
Because time only applies to this world, and this world was based off of that. So you can't say there's no time because time is a creation that was based off of tshuva. Or it came into existence in a world of tshuva.
Everything came into existence at the same time because time is part of the creation. Time doesn't exist outside the creation. So you can't talk about what happened before the creation.
No, I'm not saying before the creation. I'm saying it was the creation was made in an environment of time, of tshuva. I mean.
Yeah, that's what it means in the Gemara when it says that
time was invented by the first day, because it says
correct.
On the first day, it's only first day if there was. It's only second day if there's a first day. The first day.
Yeah, but, okay, but that's all true.
But
that's not. Yeah, tshuva is a creation, and God made it, and He put it as a principle into the world. He put it there because without it, the world would not stand. So my point was only that.
13 attributes.
Huh?
Is that something else?
What?
Like the 13 attributes of God. I was trying to compare it to that. Is that like?
Well, yes, but of course, don't think that the 13 attributes were invented when God told them to Moses.
Well,
they weren't.
Of course, but I'm saying.
Okay.
But tshuva is like one of those.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Thank you.
Indeed, that's explicit. Yeah. Okay, so that I just wanted to point that out. I'm using a piece of logic here which I haven't explained. Maybe I should explain it just for the partly because it will make it more complete, and partly because as a logician I like explaining things that are logical. You have an item, a thing. A thing has different descriptions, and the different descriptions that it has can explain it to you, or have you related to it in a variety of ways. Now, I'll give you an example, and then I'll show you how it applies to our thinking. A person builds a tower. Builds a tower in his backyard. Not in his backyard. A person building a tower. So you ask him, why are you building the tower? He says, because I want to see over that hill. The hill is too tall. When I build this tower, just 1 second, I have to take some insulin here. I want to see over the hill. When I build a tower, I'll be able to climb up on top of the tower and see over the hill. Oh, I understand that. That's reasonable. Let's suppose he finishes building the tower at night. Well, I have to wait till tomorrow. He won't be able to see over the hill at nighttime. There's no lights on the other side of the hill. Okay, but he built it for that purpose, and tomorrow he'll realize the purpose. So building the tower is a means. Seeing over the hill is the end. And building the tower is the means to the end of seeing over the hill. That's all trivial and obvious. Now contrast that with this case. He's building the tower, and I say to him, why are you building the tower? I'll tell you why. Because this piece of land happens to belong to Bill. And Bill did me a terrific favor. And I want to repay him. And I know that Bill wants a tower. He wants a tower here. So I'm building this tower on Bill's land in order to repay the favor that he did to me. Okay. So he's building the tower in order to pay back the favor. But now tell me something. When he finishes building the tower, hasn't he then finished doing the favor? The favor doesn't come into existence tomorrow morning. Bill wants a tower here, and he built a tower where Bill wants it. Now Bill has a tower. So in this case, the building of the tower and the favor are the same thing. It's not that building the tower is a means and giving the favor is the end. One is a means to the other. This one accomplishes that one. The very same actions of putting together the bricks is doing the favor. Putting the last brick is finishing the building of the tower and finishing doing the favor. This one process has two descriptions. It is a building of a tower and it's a doing of a favor. Now when you ask why, you know one description, you see what he's doing, he's building a tower. But you don't know why he's building a tower. So he says to you, you don't know why I'm building the tower because you don't know that building the tower is also something else. It is something else. Not that it's a means to something else tomorrow morning. Building the tower is also doing the favor. That's why I'm doing it. See a person standing on the street and he waves his hand seemingly towards someone on the other side of the street, up and down, up and down, up and down, and around. I think, gee, that's odd. I wonder why he's doing that. Right? He says, I'll tell you why. Because that guy across the street is a spy, and I'm sending him information. When he sees these motions, he gets the information from it. So there you might have it, but it's simultaneous. Making the hand motions is transmitting the information. It's not like typing letters and then pressing the send button on an email, where when you type the message, nothing goes. It's saying your computer. That's just a means to having a content, which later you can press the arrow and then it'll go. So there are two different, when you say that I did A in order to accomplish B, in order to accomplish can mean means to ends, or it can mean that A and B are both descriptions of the same thing, only B is a description that reveals what the importance of it is, which description A doesn't reveal to you. Now, when we say that God uses justice in order to accomplish kindness, it becomes a very interesting question. Is it that the justice is a means and the kindness is an end? Or is it that the justice itself is a kindness and you may not see that. You may not see that the justice itself is a kindness. I'll give you a contrast between the two possibilities. I want to build my child's character, and I'd like to do it through a positive reinforcement. I say to him, here's a task that needs to be accomplished, and if you accomplish the task, then I will give you a reward. The natural thought is his doing the task is a means. It's a means to justify my giving him the reward. And the reward is where I act towards him kindly, right? Because that's what he really wants, and that's what he really enjoy. And the task itself is only a means to get to that end, which is kindness. But suppose, and then I'll come back and reinterpret this in a second, but suppose he needs to do something, he's trying, but he's not trying very hard. And I do something to frighten him, scare him into putting everything he has into it. And then when he does that, he succeeds. Could you imagine him later saying to me, thank you for scaring me? Your scaring me was really a kindness, because without that, I wouldn't have succeeded. The frightening itself was a kindness. What's the alternative? The alternative is, you're not succeeding, fail, drown, drop, lo akhpat, not involved, doesn't bother me. No, the reason why you frighten me is because you care about me, because you don't want me to fail. It's your kindness and concern and commitment and compassion to me that motivated you to scare me. That itself was a gift. That's where you can understand that justice is itself kindness. Not that it's just a means to kindness. That's why when we say justice is in order to, the in order to is not that it's a means to the other one, it's just a different description of it. And the different description then reveals what the motivation for it is. Yeah.
I think it's a correlation or comparison to Rabbi Kiva and Nachum Ish Gamze. So So one said Gamzu L'Taiva, meaning it's a bad thing, but it's for the good. And Nachum Ish Gamzu was on a higher level. It said Kol Dovid Rahman L'Tava. Everything that Rebbeinu Shalom does is good. That's good itself. It's not bad, but for the good.
No, we're not going to have this. We're not going to have. First of all, you mixed up the people with the statements. Nachum Ish Gamzu said Gamzu L'Tova. Right? I mean that's what's called Nachum Ish Gamzu, right? No, but they both have the lamed. They both have the lamed, and the lamed is 4. So the 4 is in both of their statements. Nachum Ish Gamzu said this too is for good. Rabbi Kiva said everything that God does is for good. Both of them said that. But I'm saying something else now. I'm talking now from the point of view of the agent, not from the point of view of the recipient. Let me try to make this clear. Let's suppose that the fright is what caused him to apply himself with all his abilities and succeed. Now, take the agent out. Let's just suppose lightning struck. Accidentally. And that shocked him and galvanized him and caused him to succeed at the task. Right? He's not going to say that the lightning was good. The succeeding the task was good. The lightning wasn't good. It was a means. Because the lightning struck, he applied himself and he succeeded the task. It wasn't good in of itself. If you put the agent in, you get another dimension. What's motivating the agent by frightening him? What's motivating him is, I don't want him to fail. I love him. I want him to be successful. That's the kindness. The kindness is in the motivation of the agent who's doing it, not in the content of the action itself. That's the dimension that I was appealing to. Right? Yeah.
So we could consider that the justice system that was created from the source of love and kindness enables actually the potential of teshuvah and personal growth, so to speak. Like, could that be interpreted?
I think that, let me repeat it he's asking that justice, having come from loving kindness, also enables tshuva because you want it to succeed. You want it to be an instrument for success. I think that's right. I think the Ramchal actually says that tshuva is part of the process of enabling justice to have that end. After all, tshuva is an expression of rachmim, of mercy. Now, the famous midrash, which says that God first considered creating the world with strict justice, and then saw it wouldn't stand and added mercy to it, didn't take away the strict justice, he added mercy to it. Tshuva is an expression of mercy. So here's where tshuva gets inserted into the picture. It gets inserted into the picture as a way of modifying strict justice. And you can do that only because strict justice, as we said, the vice president, over the head of strict justice is loving kindness. Otherwise, you couldn't modify it at all. So it's precisely the fact that strict justice is generated by loving kindness. Therefore, it's under the control of loving kindness. And therefore, when it becomes too strict, loving kindness says to put in mercy. That's how tshuva gets it. It's exactly how tshuva gets it. I think that's right. Yeah? Together? Okay. Okay, there's a long general discussion here, which I can't apply in any detail, so I'm going to skip paragraph 2. He then describes 4 different conditions the world can be in. The condition of the world is the context in which we perform our avodah, we do our mitzvos, we live up to our challenges, and the conditions of the world vary our challenges very considerably. Whether the condition that we are living in is peace or war, or wealth or poverty, or health or sickness, generally or specifically, whether it's a time when the temple is built or not built, when it's a time when there is prophecy or isn't prophecy. These matters determine the context of the service of God that we do. They determine also the types of perfections that are available for human beings to create by their choices. And he divides these conditions of the world into 4 different periods. Now, the puzzle here, to which I don't have a fully satisfactory answer, is that when you look at the 4 periods, they're in a clear order of less to more, but they aren't chronological. Chronological order is not the same as the order of growth from less to more. So I'll take you through it, and I'll explain to you what the difficulty is. I've asked people, I haven't had a good explanation for it. He says, when you look at the world, when we look at the world, we see there are 4 different levels, positions. And the prophets have talked about this. And it's similar to the growth of a person starting from birth and developing. One such position is that foolishness and darkness have control, great control over the condition of the person. He has almost no understanding or knowledge, certainly no understanding or knowledge of God, Creator. And in his own condition of development is very primitive. And this is what in world history is called the 2,000 years of Tohu. In the 2nd verse of the Bible, it talks about the earth being Tohu vavohu. Tohu vavohu means roughly that it wasn't formed, structured, organized, categorized, laws weren't present. There was a kind of chaos that was taking place, not in terms of modern chaos theory with nonlinear systems, real chaos. And now, the first 2,000 years, roughly, of world history before the giving of the Torah, what kind of condition was that? What were people doing during that period of time? What were they accomplishing in that period of time? So those who've been with me, you remember that in the Garden of Eden, with the tree of knowledge, all 613 commandments were wrapped up in the tree of knowledge. And he who lives by the 613 commandments not only develops his own spirituality, but perfects the whole of the creation and makes the whole of the creation prepared for eternity in the world to come, because everything goes in, including the mosquitoes, according to Ramchal. So he's partner with God in the process of perfecting the creation. If you don't have 613 commandments, you don't do that. The mitzvahs that you do affect your own spirituality and your own general condition, but they do not contribute to perfecting the world as a whole. Well, since man was created to do that, and after the expulsion from the Garden of Eden, he was operating with the 7 categories of commandments, which is about 65 out of 613, he's not doing it. So what is he doing? Well, he's a farmer, and he plays his lute in the evenings, and but that's not what he was created for. So that's the 2,000 years of drifting and occupying themselves with things which aren't the purpose of creation at all. That's the first period, and it applies to early childhood of a child. The 4-year-old doesn't know anything about right and wrong, doesn't know anything about God, doesn't know anything about spiritual. He just knows it's my toy and I want another cookie. When a child gets to 7 or 8, they can be much more sophisticated, especially if they're girls rather than boys. Everyone knows that girls develop faster than boys do. So at a younger age, they're much more sensitive, much more refined, much more intelligent, much more mature. Okay, that's the first First period. The second period is better than that period. And it is like our period. Our period now. In exile, after the destruction of the temples. So he's skipping over. The first 2,000 is from the creation up until the giving of the Torah. Now he's skipping the giving of the Torah and the first temple and the second temple to exile. That whole middle period is skipped. This is the second phase of the development of the child. And it's our situation where we have knowledge of the existence of God and His perfection. We have His Torah. We can serve Him. So this is gigantically better than the first 2,000. But there are no open miracles. There are no prophets. A great deal of true understanding is missing because that true understanding comes from Ruach HaKodesh. Now here, many will tell you that Ruach HaKodesh does exist in our times, just prophecy doesn't. He's using the word Ruach HaKodesh in a narrower sense, a certain type of divine inspiration. Real understanding of the world requires divine inspiration, and that's also missing. And he says, even though you have human reason and human intellect, and that does give you some understanding, so do animals have reason and intellect. In much lesser degree, no, the porpoises are not clicking to one another, porpoise Shakespeare. No, that's an academic fantasy. But animals do solve problems. Crows sometimes better than chimpanzees. Don't be hypnotized by the so-called phylogenetic tree, which is a fantasy. But true understanding of the world is not delivered by those sources. And I will stop here to explain this a little bit, and maybe I won't be able to continue it now, because I think there's a very important point here. The Gemara talks about two areas of esoteric study, Ma'aser Bereishis and Ma'aser Merkava. Roughly translated, Ma'aser Bereishis is the work of creation. Ma'aser Merkava is the work of the chariot, referring to the first few chapters of the book of Ezekiel, where the foundations of Jewish mysticism are expressed in code. Now, it seems, from some things the Rambam writes, that Ma'aser Bereishis is the study of nature. And he says, quoting Chazal, this is a secret, and you shouldn't teach it in public, and only to two students, and to them you shouldn't explain it, you should just hint at it, and so forth and so on. Really? Study of nature? So there are some who are convinced that the Rambam is really the classic Aristotelian. And when he says the study of nature, he means Aristotelian physics and metaphysics. And they are faced with this insurmountable problem, which they don't even acknowledge, that the Rambam quotes the Mishnah that it has to be kept secret, whereas Aristotelian physics and metaphysics is taught was taught in Greece, and it was taught in the Hellenistic period in Israel, and is widely studied, and his real works don't exist. Aristotle's works were lost. What we have are his lecture notes. But they do exist, the people studying it and everything else. What kind of secret is that? Everybody knows about that. How could you say that that's what it means? So Rabbi Meisman, who wrote about this, among other things, in his 900-page book, quotes a Ran, the Drashas Ran. And he said, I'm putting this in modern terminology, but this is the Ran's idea, that when you study nature, there are two ways to do it. There's bottom up and top down. Bottom up means something like the scientific method. You observe what's going on in the world, you see certain correlations or breaks in correlations, and you wonder why that is, and then you try to create a theory which will give you some understanding of why it happens, and you try to test the theory. That's a burlesque because some theories can't be tested and some theories aren't meant to be tested. It's much more complicated than that. Philosophy of science is a complicated subject. But it's, you look and you think and you figure out ideas and you try to test them and compare them and work them out. This is done all over the world. It's done in public. People write books about it. It's not hidden at all. But there's another way to study nature, and that is to start from the divine. How does God create the world? And although some segments in that process are hidden from us, but there are others which are not hidden from us. There are certain spiritual roots or sources, and they give rise to and manage things in the physical world or in the created world, and those can be traced, but you can only trace those if God gives it to you. You're not going to find it in a telescope or a microscope. You're going to find it with experimentation. So when we talk about the real knowledge of the world, even of nature, the Ramchal is telling us this is dependent upon Ruach HaKodesh, on divine inspiration. Without that, you're not going to get it. So the fact that you have science, a lot of which isn't true, don't forget, today's science is very different from what we had 100 years ago. 100 years from now, oh, not 100 years from now, right? Now we know everything right, and we have everything fixed right. And science has come to an end? Probably not, right? Probably not. So a lot of what we think we know today is false, and it has to be revised and changed and supplemented, and more revolutions are around the corner, right? That's a human activity. He's not talking about that. He's talking about this other great revelation that gives us revelation about the world. So that's missing from our condition. That's the second level of human development that you could think of roughly as the teenage years, which comes after childhood, which is terribly deficient. But in the chronology of the world, this is stage 3, not stage 2, because stage 2 is a higher stage, as he points out. When we had the temple, when we had prophecy, when we had open miracles, God's providence was manifest to us. It was observable. Prophecy is the highest spiritual development of a human being. That's not available to us now, but it was available to them. Prophecy was very common. The rabbinic sources tell us that in the 1,000 years from the Exodus until the beginning of the Second Temple, there were 1,200,000 prophets, 600,000 men and 600,000 women. Every Jew knew prophets. Every Jew interacted with prophets. That created an entirely different context in which you could serve God. I don't know what I should do. What should I prioritize? Ask the prophet. He'll tell you. I have a pain. Why is God giving me that pain? What's the message? Ask the prophet and he'll tell you. Today we don't have that. So this third level in terms of development, this will be the point where the child learns and undergoes spiritual training and could achieve prophecy, the highest spirituality possible for a human being in this world, which is third in the development of the child, but now it's second in the chronology of the world. And then the fourth level is the level of the time of the Mashiach, where the whole world is full of knowledge of God, which some say includes not only Jews but non-Jews, and even on the level of prophecy. The whole world, all of it. Not selected prophets like there were in the first temple period. Certain types of miracles will be open and manifest, similar to the ones you had during the temple period, but more so. So that's the goal towards which people are developing. And of course, in the life of the average of human beings individually, we don't get to that. That fourth level doesn't have a parallel in the human development of each person. But he divides the categories into 4. There are 4 distinct levels. The description of the levels makes it quite clear that they're distinct. But why it is that he says explicitly it's an analogy to human development, and in human development the categories could be called 1, 2, 3, 4, and in the chronology of the world it's 1, 3, 2, 4. What I'm supposed to make out of that, I don't know. I don't know why that that should be that way. Now, I've been thinking about this for 30 years or 40 years, and today when I was thinking about giving the shir, something hit me which might be a tiny step forward, because when God created Adam, he didn't develop from childhood. He didn't go through darkness and incompetence and deficiency at the first. He started as a full adult 50-50 in terms of his motivation, so his free will was perfect. And in a context where God's presence was manifest, he had prophecy from God right away. He lived in a place which miraculously took care of all of his needs. Gottleib, the land of eternal spring, no clothes, no habitations, perfect weather, food growing spontaneously. He didn't start him in the 2,000 years of wilderness and confusion and lack of structure. So, and then for him, the lower world was second, not first. So maybe, although it's parallel to the development of child, but God didn't create the world for development of children. He didn't create it for that. He created a world without children. And had they succeeded in their challenge in the Garden of Eden, there never would have been any children. Not children like that anyway. They would have been born in a state of perfection, and there would be no problems of development and all the rest. So, one Midrash says, they got into the bed 1 hour, Adam and Chava, and the next hour they came out, and Cain and Hillel came out fully born and fully adult. There's no long period of darkness and childhood and incompetence and all the rest. So maybe the development of the child as a parallel isn't parallel to the structure that God put into the world. He didn't put into the world children first. So maybe that helps in overcoming the problems that's been bothering me for all these years. But anyway, that's what I have to say about chapter 8.